are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the Radical Majid Nawaz. And the title and topic for today's stream is on your screens right about now. And that's called Nigel Farage Devastates Globalist UniParty on his way to becoming Prime Minister. It was an absolute drubbing in the United Kingdom in recently held partial local elections. Before people outside of the United Kingdom get too carried away, these were not general elections. They were local elections and in some instances constituency by-elections for Parliament. But they were incredibly crucial for gauging the pulse of the nation. And Nigel Farage has absolutely destroyed, without any sense of hyperbole, the chances of the two major parties, the UniParty, the Labour and the Conservative establishment, globalist-led two main parties. Farage's Reform Party has absolutely smashed them in these recent elections in the United Kingdom. The scale of the loss should be up on your screens right about now. The Times reports 3rd of May 2025. With all the results declared, the 2025 local elections have proved a triumph for Nigel Farage's Reform UK, which has won 10 councils, 2 mayoralties, and a parliamentary seat in Runcorn and Helsby. Reform won 677 of about 1,600 council seats in England, including control of councils from Durham in the north to Kent in the south, in what was a very bad set of results for Labour and the Conservatives. The Liberal Democrats, another smaller party in the UK, as you can see from the name, a Liberal Party, also performed well, taking control of 3 councils. The Conservatives lost control of all 15 councils they won last time. It was an absolute hammering, but not just because the Conservatives hemorrhaged votes to Nigel Farage's Reform, but also because the by-election that was held for a parliamentary seat that coincided with these local elections was a Labour safe seat. And the Labour Party, in addition to the Conservatives hemorrhaging votes to Nigel Farage and his Reform Party, also, that is the Labour Party, also hemorrhaged votes in that constituency by-election. And from this article in the Times on the 3rd of May, local election 2025 results in maps and charts, we learned the following. There was a 20 percentage point swing to Reform, with the Conservatives finishing 3rd, some 10,000 votes behind Po Chin, who was the Reform Party parliamentary candidate in Runcorn. To continue reading, to put the result into context, Runcorn and Helsby was Labour's 49th safest seat, with a majority of over 14,000 heading into the by-election. Reform only received 18% of the vote there in last year's general election. Now, though Reform only won the parliamentary seat in Runcorn by 6 votes after a recount, that isn't really the issue. The real news is, as the Times reported in the article that we just read to you from, the real issue is the huge swing that Labour lost so many votes in that swing from them to Reform in the Runcorn seat. You can see that on your screens now. So look at the red block from 2024, labeled 22,358. That was all of Labour's votes in 2024. Only last year, when they won the so-called landslide, which we here at Radical Media mentioned back then, was not actually a landslide, but an illusion. So take a look at that again. A huge red block there in 2027. That was the Labour victory. But then compare that to the drop in 2025's by-election in the same red block for Labour. Their votes went from 22,358 to 12,639. Now, that huge swing away from Labour, as is evidenced in the chart that you are being shown, all went to Reform. Look at that. The top light blue, sky blue block in 2024, Reform only gained 7,662 votes in Runcorn. But in this recent by-election, they were at 12,645, beating the Labour Party by 6 votes. Almost all of those Labour votes hemorrhaged to Reform. In addition, the Conservative votes also hemorrhaged to Reform. This is the real news of the night. It is not so much the margin of victory that the Reform Party won by in the Runcorn by-election, nor indeed the margin of victory in the other seats around the country. But the real news is the size of the swing away from Labour victories and Labour safe seats, and indeed Tory victories that they had held since Boris Johnson's time as Prime Minister. That huge swing from both sides went to Reform in an achievement that had previously been assumed by the globalist establishment UniParty, Labour and Conservatives, to be impossible in the United Kingdom. To continue reading from the Times election breakdown, in an article, as you can see on your screens, from the 2nd of May headlined, Kemi Badenoch, that's the Conservative leader, vows turnaround after Conservatives drubbing. I'm going to read an extract from that for you. The Times reports, 2nd of May, the Tories lost control of 13 councils and lost more than 600 council seats as voters deserted the party for Reform UK and the Liberal Democrats. Of course, that Liberal Democrats to a lesser extent. To continue reading, the party's projected national vote share fell to 15%, behind Reform, Labour and the Liberal Democrats, and only 4 percentage points above the Greens. So from the previous chart, we showed you how much the Labour Party hemorrhaged votes to Reform in Runcorn. And now we're showing you just the scale of the loss that the Conservatives suffered also in hemorrhaging votes to Reform. You see there, they lost control of 13 councils and more than 600 council seats. Their party's projected national vote share fell to 15%. It is unprecedented. Reform Chairman Zia Yusuf, leader Nigel Farage have every reason to be celebrating this week because of the scale of the tectonic shift that has just occurred in British politics. This is not just a by-election victory in Runcorn, adding to Reform's tally of still, as of yet, single-digit parliamentary seats. This is not just a council seat victory. This is a shift, a tectonic shift in how politics is going to play out in the United Kingdom. Because, as we've mentioned, the key news here is the size of the swing to a third party that is demonstrably, from the data, able to cut through the middle and seize votes from the two larger establishment globalist parties and cause them very real damage where they've held seats and take votes from both of them in a way that swings results in their favor. This had been previously assumed not to be possible. And of course, now it is devastating the Conservatives' chances. As you can see again from the Times, Reform swept to power in Lincolnshire, Lancashire, Kent, and Staffordshire, areas that were previously Tory strongholds. In Staffordshire, the Conservatives lost 46 of the 56 seats they held before Thursday. In Tunbridge Wells, the party no longer has a single councillor. Oh dear. Oh dear. What's happened? Because, of course, traditionally, the nature of the electoral system in the United Kingdom, being the first past the post electoral system, has not favoured insurgent, smaller third parties, has not enabled them to rise through the system and cut through in this way. The Liberal Democrats themselves have long tried to achieve this and have repeatedly and continuously failed at cutting through the middle and achieving the sort of victory that we just demonstrated that Nigel Farage managed to achieve. And what's so interesting is that Farage's Reform Party has reached a tipping point. And that tipping point has been broken down by the number crunchers, as you can see in this Times headline, to be sitting around somewhere around 30%. We'll read the headline from the 4th of May at the Times. Reform's magic number, 30%, is tipping point to turn votes into seats. Subheaded, our electoral system has long benefited the two main parties, but last week, Nigel Farage's party was able to break through. Going to read a section of that Times data for you there. 4th of May says, the tipping point appears to be about 30%. For example, in Wiltshire, Reform won only, say, 27% of the vote, but just 10% of the seats. All right? So in Wiltshire, where Reform had got 27%, under 30%, their share of the vote was discriminated against by the nature of our first past the post system and didn't allow them to translate that 27% into 27% of seats, but rather they gained only 10% of the seats. Whereas if you continue reading in Northamptonshire, Reform won 31% of the vote. However, with that 31%, not too different from the 27% in Wiltshire, mind you, but in Northamptonshire, with that 31% of the vote, they were able to secure the council, control of the council, with 65% of the seats. So where Reform's vote manages to surpass the 30% approximate threshold, the disadvantage that smaller parties face under our first past the post system, which means simply that in every constituency, the parties that don't win a plurality or the largest share of the vote in that constituency, they gain 0 seats, even if they came second. The winner takes all in the first past the post system, which severely jeopardizes parties that come second, because if you could be second at 27% of the vote, for example, and that 27% could still mean you get no seat in that constituency. And if that's repeated all around the country, you're getting, say, 27%, 26% in each constituency, you're still going to get 0 seats if you came second. And yet, so when you tally up the national result, you got 27% again of the national vote share, but with 0 seats in parliament, even though 27% of the entire population everywhere voted for you. That doesn't seem fair, but it's the nature of our first past the post system. However, as it works against second place runner-ups, it works in the favor of those who win in each constituency, gaining them 100% of the seats if they surpass that tipping point to win the seat. At the moment in 2025, that tipping point is around 30%. So where Reform was able to break through that 30% barrier in each constituency, of course, they began winning the seats in each of those constituencies. And so the disadvantage that the first past the post system places them under at below 30% turns into a huge advantage for them at above 30%. And of course, that's what's been happening in this recent election. So now with that explanation, let's read this again. The tipping point appears to be about 30%. For example, in Wiltshire, Reform won 27% of the vote, but just 10% of the seats. In Northamptonshire, it won 31% of the vote, but secured control of the council with 65% of the seats. Even in 2024, when Farage won his seat, only 5 of the 650 MPs elected were Reform, despite the party winning 14% of the vote nationally. Last week's results were an indication that a system that has long held back Farage and his parties may be starting to work in his favour. And so we're going to show you this in pictorial terms. Here is a hockey stick plot to demonstrate what we've just said about the 30% magic number. It's there on the top there labelled the Farage hockey stick. Above about 30% of the vote, Reform flips from a small party to one that can win big. Hover over the dots for more detail. Of course, this won't be interactive for you on your screens, but you can see on the left the vertical column stating seat percentage and the horizontal column stating vote percentage. And as you can see, as the vote percentage begins to creep above 30%, the seat percentage rapidly begins to rise, hence forming the hockey stick pattern on your screens. And so it does appear that through these recent partial local elections in the UK, Farage's Reform Party has demonstrated that it's able to break through that tipping point at 30% and turn the previous disadvantage of the first past the post system into their advantage. And here you can see it represented again in a chart form for everybody. And you can see at the top of the screens, a third of the vote, 2/3 of the seats, which is what we've just explained about the tipping point being reached at 30%. Reform vote share and seat share selected counties. So look at, for example, there, Derbyshire. They got a 36.8% vote share, and their seat share as a result was 65.6%. And that similar result is reflected through all of those selected counties: Doncaster, Durham, Kent, Lancashire, Nottinghamshire, each of them above 30%, and each of their seat share as a result of that vote share being above 30% sits above 60%. So what that tells you is that in our system in the United Kingdom, if you're able to gain at least 30% of the votes, you're guaranteed, that's a third roughly, you're guaranteed 2/3 of the seats. And so that's the magic number. And that's what's happened clearly in these elections. And it's why the real news is the swing of votes to Reform. Because if the Reform Party are able to repeat this in the general election for seats for Parliament, then of course Nigel Farage gains 2/3 of the seats in Parliament and becomes Prime Minister. Again, reading from the Times for you from the 4th of May, a similar arithmetic can be at play when the country goes to the polls. Labour won just 1/3 of the votes in last year's general election, but 63% of the seats, a big majority for Sir Keir Starmer. The numbers were similar for Tony Blair's third election victory in 2005. In 2015, David Cameron secured a narrow Conservative majority with 37% of the vote. Parties with somewhat lower national shares tend to win disproportionately fewer seats. The difference between a quarter of the national vote and a third of it can be the difference between irrelevance and power. And there you have it. That's the phenomenon that we are witnessing. And that is that for the first time in the United Kingdom, a third party led by Nigel Farage called the Reform Party, chaired by Zia Yusuf, has managed to reach that 30% tipping point through the middle of the existing two establishment parties, the Globalist UniParty, the Conservatives and the Tories, who pretty much stand for the same thing. And again, the Times reports here in its article headline, Nigel Farage has blown apart two-party politics. Here's what's next. To read an extract from that for you. In Downing Street, there were no smiles. Labour's loss of 198 seats was more than twice as bad as party strategists had expected. The setback led to the first serious criticisms of Starmer and his chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney's strategy since they got a grip on government last autumn. While things were bad for Labour, they were an existential threat to the Tories. This was the first time the Conservatives had not won a majority on a single council since the local government system was created in 1889. Just consider that. This was the first time the Conservatives had not won a majority on a single council since the local government system was created in 1889. It is truly a devastating result for Labour and the Conservatives. Both of them should be licking their wounds right about now. And to continue, you see here, Reform UK snatches seats from Labour and Tories in election rout. And we're going to read again from that Times article for you, dated the 2nd of May. Nigel Farage has said that the era of two-party politics is finished after Reform UK won control of a swath of councils in a local election rout and ousted Labour in a by-election. Reform won the biggest share of the vote in the local elections, the first time on record that a party other than Labour or the Conservatives has done so. Farage said that the results marked the beginning of the end for the Tories and demonstrated that Reform was smashing into Labour's vote in its heartlands. He said that people who had mocked his aspirations to be Prime Minister were not laughing now and described his party's ascendancy as a reform quake. He added, "Today marks the end of two-party politics. It's finished." Farage gained more than 670 new councillors, while the Tories lost a similar amount. Labour lost more than 180 seats. Reform overturned a Labour majority of almost 15,000 to win the Runcorn and Helsby by-election. And there we have it, folks. It is really the end of the two-party system in the UK. We posit to you that means it's also most likely the end of establishment politics. Not yet, of course, coming up in the UK. The entire system will be changed and reformed once Reform win. And these recent election results demonstrate that they are highly likely to win nationally in any general election that is coming up. And as the Times reports, 3rd of May, Farage will be hoping his party can build on Thursday's success, and nationally Reform is leading in the polls, according to our tracker, followed by Labour and the Conservatives. So Reform is leading nationally. The writing is already on the wall. Here's what that looks like for you. And you can see it there. Reform at 26%, Labour at 23%, the Conservatives at 20%, Libs at 14%, and the Greens at 10%. Reform being in the lead at 26%, though these results in these partial local elections are likely to continue the hemorrhaging of votes and support from Labour and the Conservatives to Reform, taking them from that poll position at 26% above the 30% tipping point that we mentioned earlier. That's going to happen. It appears inevitable. And when it does, Nigel Farage enters Downing Street as the new Prime Minister of the UK in a feat that most people believed was impossible until this week. Of course, those of you who follow radical media have been fully aware that that's what we've been projecting for a long, long time here. Of course, you should by now be used to the fact that we usually tend to get such forecasts correct. And this, of course, Reform victory comes off the back of a recent globalist attempt to cause division and rancor within the Reform Party ranks after a failed coup attempt against Nigel Farage to prevent precisely this result that you see now. And so it is, of course, that context in which we mentioned a very brief hello after this result there. You can see on May the 2nd, our post. And hello, Rupert Lowe. Who was Rupert Lowe? Rupert Lowe was a Reform member of Parliament, one of the 5 or 6 now that Nigel Farage had working with him in the British Parliament. Rupert Lowe chose to allow the surge in popularity for reform under the chairmanship of Zia Yusuf and the leadership of Nigel Farage to go to his head, and allowed him and his ego to believe that he could not only lead the Reform Party after deposing Nigel Farage, but indeed become prime minister in this country. That was the failed coup attempt that happened just around a month ago, as you can see being reported in the Times, 6th of January. It happened after Elon Musk offered Farage a donation, a large donation to the Reform Party to allow Tommy Robinson into the party. Farage flat out refused. He said, "We're not for sale." As you can see in the headline from the Times there, Nigel Farage will sacrifice Elon Musk's donation to keep out Tommy Robinson. Subheaded, the Reform UK leader says he will defend his party's principles and wants no links with extremism of any kind. Well, when Farage said no to Elon Musk, what did Musk do? Well, Musk started openly and publicly supporting a rebellion against Nigel Farage and the leadership of Reform, including and specifically a desire to oust Reform's British Muslim chairman, Zia Yusuf. And Musk posted that in this rebellion, he now decided that he would support Rupert Lowe against Nigel Farage. There is the Times headline: Rupert Lowe, Reform, and the civil war, he says, will tear it down. And you can see from the 9th of March, reading from that article, in January, Elon Musk backed him, Rupert Lowe, to take over Reform after a spat with Farage over his refusal to defend the far-right convict, Tommy Robinson. Well, Lowe tried, with the backing of Musk, the promise of the funding that Musk had originally offered to Farage, and Farage refused for the sake of principle. Lowe, on the other hand, having no such issue with principles, decided that he wanted that money, and he wanted to be the leader of Reform and the prime minister in the country, and that his ego convinced him that that was indeed going to be easy for him, to the extent that, as you can see, Lowe even wanted the chairman of Reform, Zia Yusuf, to be taken out completely as the chairman of the party. Well, that didn't really go too well for Rupert Lowe. It didn't really go too well for his sidekick, also ex-Reform activist Ben Habib. And it didn't really go too well for their naive, ignorant, and ego-fueled sponsor and backer, Elon Musk. The entire thing crashed, and it can be judged posthumously, of course, by these election results. Hence, these results are a victory, not only a victory for the Reform Party's Nigel Farage and Zia Yusuf, but also a vindication. As you can see, we've posted there on your screens now. Rupert Lowe deservedly belongs now in a footnote of history as a one-time member of parliament who was elected at a certain given moment under a Reform Party banner, is no longer a Reform Party MP, and let's see how it goes, but is in danger of even perhaps being replaced by an actual Reform Party MP in any next general election, where, of course, Reform will most likely contest his seat. That's pretty much the end of Rupert Lowe's aspirations. A vindication for chairman of Reform, Zia Yusuf, and the direction that he's been headed, or under whom the Reform Party has headed, and vindication for Nigel Farage in entrusting Zia Yusuf with such a direction. And so, in summary, this has been devastating, not only for the Conservatives, devastating not only for Labour, but also devastating for Nigel Farage and Reform Party's internal critics attempting a coup against his leadership to prevent his rise and ascendancy to becoming Prime Minister of this country. The last election, as the Times reports, produced a vast Labour victory from an absolutely terrible share of the vote. The stable government that was produced was a political mirage. That's the Times reporting on the 2nd of May. But regulars with the Warrior Creed live stream and radical media in general will be aware that at the time of Keir Starmer's victory that was called a landslide, that's precisely what we said. So you can see that on your screens now from the 11th of July 2024. Despite this, Starmer's Labour must run with the idea that they won by a landslide and hold an unprecedented mandate from the British public. Without such an illusion, which is the word we've used there, you can see it, 11th of July 2024. Without such an illusion, it would be much harder for them to bring about the great reset they so desire. And so it's only after these election results people are beginning to see the nature of that illusion, which we said back then was an illusion, because even back then in July 2024, the victory was marginal and Reform was second in each of those places that Labour won by, granting Labour the illusion of a landslide victory because of the nature of our first past the post system, which is winner takes all. However, as you can see, that marginal victory for Labour was very, very weak and is now slipping away to the extent that we're mentioning. And again, reading from the previous Radical Dispatch on this, what really happened is that both parties, in fact, hemorrhaged votes at the last minute to Nigel Farage's Reform UK. That's from as far back as July 2024 that we were saying that. To continue reading, Reform came second place in 98 seats across the country, yet none of those second place votes add up to anything at all in terms of parliamentary representation. That's a very large number of disenfranchised people. And we've said there, this isn't something to dismiss lightly at all. To continue reading, considering Farage had just 5 weeks' notice to launch his campaign, to go from 0 to third place in such a short space of time is something worth recognising. And of course, now it's impossible but to recognise it because he's no longer second place or third in any of those constituency seats, but in the elections that were just held, indeed, is first place, and is first place nationally in the polls as well. And to continue from that July election, Radical Media reports 11th of July 2024, as we said back then, this was the most marginal general election since 1945. Even Starmer's own vote share in his own seat was slashed by nearly half. The most acute marginal losses in terms of votes for Labour came from Britain's Muslim communities, which were until recently deemed the core of the Labour vote. The vote share, as you can see, even Starmer's was slashed by nearly half. The writing was on the wall back in that 2024 July election, the so-called Labour landslide, that votes were hemorrhaged. They were hemorrhaging votes to Reform, and that the trajectory for Reform was on the up. Anyone watching closely from back then or following our work on this would have known back then that Reform was on the ascendancy and that Nigel Farage's journey towards becoming Prime Minister was pretty much already set. And here's what that hemorrhaging of Labour votes looks like. You can see it on your screens. All of the biggest swings against Labour last night, this is last July 2024, all of the biggest swings against Labour last night happened in seats with the biggest Muslim populations. So Labour's traditional vote, where they felt the safest, are those votes they took for granted, ethnic minority votes and Muslim votes. And that's where they're losing votes the quickest, not least because of their not only inaction over the ethnic cleansing in Gaza, but their direct participation in that. Britain's Muslims are no longer in love with the Labour Party. Reform, on the other hand, in those councils it's taken seats from, has decided to ban all flags but the Union Jack and St. George's Cross. Why that's relevant is in the article itself. Have a look at this. The Times reports 5th of May. However, Labour pointed out that this would constitute an effective ban on councils showing their support for Ukraine by flying the country's flag in town halls. They claimed that Yusuf, the party's chairman, was following orders from Nigel Farage, who had previously suggested that the West provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, in that hidden in that article about the flags and Reform saying that only the English and St. George's flags can be raised in those councils they've won, was that gem of a line. And the point there is that actually, from the perspective of who the anti-war party is in the United Kingdom, which politician has been consistent in standing against expanding Britain's wars abroad, the answer is Nigel Farage. And you can see his stance on Russia there and on flying the Ukraine flags on government buildings exemplifies that. By banning the raising of any flag other than English flags on government buildings, Farage is sending a signal, as Labour responded to that signal, that anyone raising the Ukraine flags is seen as provoking any efforts to reach a deal with Russia. And as you could see, and we'll read it again for you, they claimed, that's the Labour Party, claimed that Yusuf was following orders from Nigel Farage, who had previously suggested that the West provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine. All that demonstrates is similar to Trump in the United States of America, Nigel Farage's Reform Party remains the anti-war choice, which fits with the framework that this is a bloody nose for the globalist UniParty system. And this is why they sought to prevent Nigel Farage's rise. This is why Elon Musk sought to interfere by backing Rupert Lowe. This is why Rupert Lowe decided to make the election or the attempted coup against Nigel Farage about Muslims not belonging in the Reform Party, because as we've stated many times, to continue the war in Ukraine against Russia, you need to continue stoking anti-Russian sentiment, and to continue the globalist war in Gaza against Palestinian Muslims, you need to continue stoking anti-Muslim sentiment. And so the propaganda that is at once both anti-Russian or anti-Muslim is designed to further the aims of divide and conquer, so as to coax the British population into supporting or continuing to support these wars abroad. Labour's Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the country, supports both wars. He supports the Ukraine war against Russia abroad, and he supports, of course, and has been demonstrated repeatedly to be supporting Netanyahu's war in Gaza. Nigel Farage remains the only candidate that opposes these wars in both instances, and hence will guarantee his rise to the premiership in this country. As the Times again reports 3rd of May, for the first time in history of local elections, neither of the two main parties won. In a rally on Saturday night, Farage declared it the end of two-party politics. The idea of him as the next prime minister may still be discordant for some, but Thursday's result shows that it's no longer ridiculous. And that is indeed what's happened. It's demonstrated very clearly that Farage has an absolute shot at becoming prime minister of this country, even though currently they only have, 6 seats in parliament. And it's something, again, that close observers of radical media will know that we've already projected. This is from last December. This was a scene yesterday evening. National security, check. Foreign policy, check. UK politics, check. The Grey Cardinal Andrew Fox probably agrees with me that Nigel Farage will be the UK Prime Minister sooner than most people think. We are coming. And here's an image from that day. 18th of December 2024. Farage indeed will be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And all of those who laughed at our projection back in December, as Nigel himself has said, well, they're not laughing now. And these election results demonstrate very clearly, not only that it was possible all along, but in fact that this is the most likely outcome, as these results show, in terms of the trajectory of the swings away from the Conservatives and away from Labour and towards the Reform Party, and the fact that the Reform Party has broke that 30% tipping point. The most likely outcome in the next general election in the United Kingdom, whenever that may be called, and they're telling you it's 4 years away, it may well be sooner than most people think. But the next general election, whenever that is called, we'll see Nigel Farage sitting in Downing Street as Prime Minister of the country. Take that from us. And those of you who follow regularly will know that when we're making very bold forecasts, such as this one, we usually tend to have a habit of not being wrong on such bold forecasts. Perhaps we have reasons for believing that this is to be the case, but the data now is demonstrating and supporting such bold forecasts from us. And those of you who stay tuned and remain and continue to follow what we do on this stream will remember this in any next general election, because, of course, when Nigel Farage is Prime Minister of this country, you will all remember that you heard it here first. And we'll end on that note with the following greeting to Rupert Lowe, which we, of course, recorded back then when he attempted his coup against Nigel Farage, just as a reminder that it was over for him then, and now we can see it's clearly over for those globalists who are seeking to back dissent and internal strife of the anti-Muslim variety against the Reform Party leader, Nigel Farage. Have a look at this. It's what we recorded back then when Rupert Lowe attempted his coup. Rupert Lowe will not prosper. Ben Habib will not prosper in this endeavor. Good luck to them. Ben Habib's a good businessman. Maybe he should go back to business. Rupert Lowe, go back to farming. Your political days are over. Set up a new party if you like. You probably lose your deposit. Perhaps join UKIP. But that's a dead end too, which we suspect you know, which is why there's rumors you're going to set up your own party. Either way, it's over for you. There's no coming back from this. Nigel Farage will become the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And the Reform Party's performance in this May's elections will outdo expectations, and Zia Yusuf will get the deserved credit as chairman of the Reform Party for that. It's over for you. And there we have it. So, of course, Zia Yusuf does deserve the credit for the victory. It's a vindication for both him and Nigel Farage, as is on your screens now. Victory for Reform and vindication for Nigel Farage and Zia Yusuf. This trajectory will continue, and Nigel Farage is on his way to Downing Street. That's all we've got time for today's Warrior Creed live stream. We want to encourage all of those who are subscribers to Radical Media to become premium subscribers. Without your support, we cannot continue our investigative and analytical work, whether on domestic politics in the UK or geopolitics globally. We thank all of you who are already premium subscribers. Those of you who do become premium subscribers on Radical Media gain access to this Warrior Creed live stream in audio and visual formats, as well as to all the behind the paywall content of Radical Media, which it includes exclusive news about specific events and also developments for Radical Media. And it also, as we say, includes other content behind the paywall as well. We'll be back next week on Tuesday for the Warrior Creed live stream. Until then, we thank you all very much. You've been listening to The Radical, Majid Nawaz.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
This service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.